we'll talk a bit about that as well. We are here listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. Glad you're here. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Going to take a quick break. Be back on the other side, and we'll pick up and get running tonight. Stay tuned.
I always loved watching the kids play basketball. I still do, even though things have changed. It's funny, they can't find jobs to get their careers started, and I can't afford to retire. And now we're all living together again. I supported President Obama because he spoke so beautifully. He promised change, but things changed for the worse. Obama started spending like our credit cards have no limit. His healthcare law made health insurance even more expensive. We've had stimulus and bailouts. Obama added almost $16,000 in debt for every American. How will my kids pay that off when they can't even find jobs? Now Obama wants more spending and taxes. That won't fix things. I had so many hopes. Cutting taxes and debt and creating jobs. That's the change we need. Tell President Obama to cut the job-killing debt and support the New Majority Agenda at newmajorityagenda.org.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
Welcome back into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee. It's Wednesday, January 16th, the year 2013. Do you have any idea where your Constitution is? Take a look, folks. Now, I know there are those who are of a different political philosophy than I might be, whose ideology might, how shall we say, lean to the left, who would say that you're a reactionary, you're overreacting, you're shill, you're shrill, you're strident, blah, 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 blah. But I simply want to understand some things. Most of you probably heard today that the president held a press conference again and made an announcement on new steps in an effort to control gun violence in the United States. And he will sign measures which will initiate 23 separate, quote, executive actions on gun violence. Now, I'm familiar with executive orders. I'm not quite sure I know what executive actions are now. Are those the same as presidential directives? Are we trying to further cloud the lexicon and obfuscate things with more terminology? I honestly don't know. But real quick, the president announced today that he is going to sign measures which will initiate 23 separate executive actions on gun violence. According to FoxInsider.com, it's important to note that not each one is actually an executive order or a presidential memorandum. So we have executive orders, presidential memorandums, and executive actions. I wonder if any of these equate to basically a point, step, and fetch action. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. The president announced that he and the administration, they must have misquoted him. I'm sure he said it was his administration. Anyway, he will issue a presidential memorandum to require federal agencies to make relevant data available to the background check system. Now, if the background check system doesn't already have the relevant data available to it, what exactly are they checking? Number 2, they will address unnecessary legal barriers. Oh, you mean like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? Particularly relating to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise known as HIPAA, that may prevent states from making information available to the background check system. Now, wait a minute. We just went to all this trouble to initiate HIPAA and implement HIPAA in order to protect and secure personal medical information. But now we're going to make sure we eliminate unnecessary legal barriers that prevent states from sharing the same information. And I can tell you, as someone who lives in South Carolina that was a victim of the largest data breach of a government agency, I'm not so sure I really want them removing legal barriers and sharing more stuff. Number 3, improve incentives for states to share information with the background check system. Now, improve incentives. Well, let's first of all break this down. What incentives exist for the states to share information with the, I'm assuming, federal background check system? Which, again, I go back to number 1. If the check system doesn't have relevant data, what exactly is it checking? What exactly is it using to determine that it's checked successfully? The incentives that exist for states, is that more money? And where does that money come from? And why do the incentives need improvement? Or do they just simply need to be increased? Because, you know, every state has its price. Wink, wink. And perhaps what we're talking about here is that some states just don't feel the incentive is strong enough to actually want to share. Number 4, direct the Attorney General to review categories of individuals prohibited from having a gun to make sure dangerous people are not slipping through the cracks. Ooh, the Attorney General, that paragon of virtue, that incredible intellect within the Obama administration. He is going to make the sole determination to determine what categories of individuals should be prohibited. Seems to me that if you're going to restrict the rights of certain individuals based on some sort of categorization, that probably ought to come through the legislative branch. Just saying. Not to mention the fact that using the Attorney General as the final arbiter is laughable at best. Number 5, propose rulemaking to give law enforcement the ability to run a full background check on an individual before returning a seized gun. Well, if we're doing this on an individual, one must ask the question, is the individual under arrest? Is the individual accused of a crime? Is the individual a citizen? A legal alien? A permanent alien? What kind of individual would we be running a background check on? And where was the gun seized? Was the gun seized from the same individual, or was the gun seized from someplace else? Was it lost and suddenly found? But this is rulemaking to give law enforcement the ability. Rulemaking to expand the scope and jurisdiction of law enforcement. Unilaterally, of course, as the president says. Number 6, publish a letter from alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to federally licensed gun dealers providing guidance on how to run background checks for private sellers. Is that because federally licensed gun dealers don't know how to run background checks for private sellers? Is it because they don't run background checks? That one's got a whole lot of stuff in it. Number 7, launch a national safe and responsible gun ownership campaign. Hey, I'm a small government animal, but it would seem to me the NRA already has one of those programs. Why don't you just lease it from them? Or better still, outsource it to the NRA. Just a thought. Number 8, review safety standards for gun locks and gun safes. And that will be by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission, not the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms entity, will apparently be the subject matter experts in determining safety standards for gun locks and gun safes. I don't know. I'm 8 for 8 scratching my head on these. Don't know why. Number 9. Issue a presidential memorandum to require federal law enforcement to trace guns recovered in criminal investigations. And they don't do that today? Really? I guess my question is, why not? Number 10. Release a Department of Justice report analyzing information on lost and stolen guns and make it widely available to law enforcement. Well, where did this DOJ report come from? What was the onus for the analysis? What does the report say? What kind of information was analyzed on lost and stolen guns? Is it merely make and model? Was it where they were lost and when they were found? If they've been found? Is it who stole them? Is it who owned them? Is it who sold them? So many questions. But I'm sure the Department of Justice report took all of those things into consideration before they produced their final report. Number 11, nominate an ATF director. This is a specific action that we had to include in a press conference. It would seem to me if you've got a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, that common sense would tell you somebody's supposed to be running that agency. And if there's supposed to be somebody running that agency, don't you think you'd have nominated someone by now, Mr. President? Do your bloody job. Number 12, provide law enforcement, first responders, and school officials with proper training for active shooter situations. Well, since active shooters in gun-free zones seem to be continuing to come up with new and creative ways to carry out their evil, that to me sounds like it's going to be an ongoing, eternal federal program. And it doesn't even say here Who will be providing